Yeah.
An awesome God he reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Chaotic Serenity. So, if you have been following along with the sermon series that we've had going on at Living Room Church, it has been kind of about C.S. Lewis, right? We've called it the Gospel according to C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was an atheist who the Lord grabbed a hold of his heart and softened it and brought him to saving faith in Jesus Christ. And C.S. Lewis has written a number of fictional stories, a number of allegories, kind of like if you've ever read Dante's Inferno, sort of like that. And he's also written a number of apologetic writings. And one of them that I've been reading lately is called The Problem of Pain, right? And so the premise of this book is the age-old argument that, if God is all-powerful and God is loving, then why is there suffering in the world, right? Because if God is all-powerful, he's able to do anything, then he should be able to do away with suffering, right? And if God is all-loving, he should want to do away with suffering, right? So in this book, C.S. Lewis looks at a few things. He looks at the concept of the goodness of God, the concept of love and what love entails and what love means. He looks at the concept of pain in general and ponders it. He also looks at the concept, towards the end of the book, of a literal place called hell and a literal place called heaven, right? Throughout this book, again, if y'all have been watching me for a while on The Daily Dose or on Chaotic Serenity, you've probably heard me mention that I love audiobooks, right? It's a lot easier for me to read a book by listening to it than it is to read a book by reading a book, okay? So there's a cool little feature on Audible, the service that I use, that allows me to click a button and bookmark, so to speak, a certain section or place in the book I'm reading. So if I hear, something that really intrigues me that I want to, go back to later, or something that I think might make a good topic for Chaotic Serenity, I can just hit the bookmark button and then come back to it later. I ended up putting a ton of bookmarks in this book because it is just that good. It's packed full of so many thought-provoking things. So what I wanted to do is share with y'all just a small excerpt from the book in the section where C.S. Lewis is talking about kindness in general, right? Love. And when we say love, not necessarily the way the church interprets the term love, agape, but just in general. In this country, in the world, the term love is oftentimes associated with just kindness, right? Being kind, doing nice things for people, right? Doing things to people or for people that make them happy. So anyways, here's this little excerpt. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs and then comment about it, okay? It will, I hope, be safe to suggest that some conceptions of the divine goodness, which tend to dominate our thought, though seldom expressed in so many words, are open to criticism. By the goodness of God, we mean nowadays almost exclusively his lovingness, and in this we may be right. That's good. It's pretty deep so far, right? So that first line that I read, it kind of speaks of how, what we as fallen humans tend to think about when we think of divine goodness or God's goodness, right? It should be open to criticism, right? We don't know everything. We need to kind of examine our thoughts and test them and let us return to the Lord, right? And then it talks about, whenever you hear the term goodness of God, it's almost always referred to as his lovingness, right? Or his kindness. And in a sense, that's true. That is very correct. That is an aspect of it, okay? But now the text goes on. And by love in this context, most of us mean kindness, i.e., the desire to see others and the self happy. Not happy in this way or that, just happy. What would really satisfy us would be a God who said of anything we happen to like doing, well, what does it matter? So long as they are contented, right? That's true, right? Oftentimes when we think of the term love, especially in regards to God, we think of kindness. And we would, I think, in our heart of hearts, if we're honest, we would like God to say, well, if they like doing it, even if it's bad for them, whatever, if they like doing it, hey, at the end of the day, they're happy. It's all good, right? As long as we're content, why does it matter? As long as we're having fun. And then this is what really hit home for me. One of the things, and I think it speaks to the truth of our sinful nature. C.S. Lewis goes on to say, we want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, a senile benevolence who, as they say, likes to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. Right? I don't know if you ever noticed kids hanging out with their parents versus kids hanging out with their grandparents, but oftentimes when a child goes to visit their grandparents, and I'm talking about a more traditional situation, where the children live with the parents, and they visit the grandparents from time to time on the weekend or whatever, right? I'm not necessarily talking about a situation where the grandparents are actually raising the child, their grandchild, as their own child for some reason, right? Just under what would be considered traditional circumstances. Generally, grandparents like to just make sure that they're doing something where the kid's having fun. They like to play games. They like to go places. They like to spoil them, give them gifts, give them toys, let them eat lots of sweets and sugar, and if you do that, that's fine. And if you don't do that, hey, that's fine too, right? That's not really my point. My point, generally speaking, is that time with grandparents is usually more of a time, and again, generally speaking, it's more of a time of fun. It's a time of, hey, let's just make sure that we're having a really good time and we're enjoying this time we have together, right? Now, when a child is with their parents, I would hope that there is a lot of that going on too. But with parents, there's also a lot more, I would imagine, from my experience, a lot more correction, a lot more discipline, a lot more chores maybe, a lot more responsibilities, a lot more stuff that would not be considered quite as fun and happy as going to grandma and grandpa's house, right? And so I think that that's what C.S. Lewis is getting at. We don't, in our heart of hearts, right, we don't want a father in heaven, someone who's going to chastise us when we need it, somebody who's going to correct us when we need it, somebody who's going to discipline us when we need it, right? Now, a father does much more than that. A father loves his child. A father spends time with his child. A father expresses affection to his child. I'm not saying that a father shouldn't, and I'm not saying that God doesn't, right? I'm just saying that aside from this typical concept of loving kindness, there's a whole other realm of love that goes along with being a parent, right? As a parent, we have to do things for our children and sometimes to our children that don't make them happy, but ultimately it is because we love them and it is for their good, right? But like C.S. Lewis was saying, at the end of the day, it would be a whole lot easier if we had a grandfather in heaven, right? Somebody who was just mainly looking out for showing us a good time and enjoying the moment and enjoying the time and just doing whatever, right? So going on from there, Lewis says, not many people, I admit, would formulate a theology in precisely those terms, right? And so I think what he's saying is that concept of wanting to have a grandfather, right? Even people that would acknowledge that probably wouldn't word it quite that way. Even unbelievers probably wouldn't word it quite that way, right? But that's sort of the essence of it. But a conception not very different lurks at the back of many minds. I do not claim to be an exception. I should very much like to live in a universe governed by such lines. But since it is abundantly clear that I don't, and since I have reason to believe, nevertheless, that God is love, I conclude that my conception of love needs correction. I might indeed have learned even from the poets that love is something more stern than mere kindness. There is kindness in love, but love and kindness are not coterminous. That's deep, my friends. And so what that says to me is, and for any of you that are parents, or even parents possibly of animals, if you're dog or cat parents, but especially parents of children, I'm sure you can relate that sometimes our children perceive that we're doing things that are not out of love, when in reality, it is out of love because we know what's best for them, right? So someone could say that, well, how can an all-loving God allow so-and-so to get cancer, right? Well, what if God is using that cancer out of his love, right, for express purposes of good that we just can't see until we look back? Hindsight's 2020, right? What if God did not allow me to become ensnared by alcohol when I was younger and develop an addiction to alcohol? And what if God didn't allow me to become an alcoholic? If he would have withheld that from me, that would have been great, right? I could have saved a whole lot of pain and trouble in my personal life, in my marriage. It could have saved a whole lot of trouble, and in general would have made things a whole lot more happy in my life in the long run, right? But if he would have withheld that, would I be as close to him as I am right now? I believe that God used that to drive me closer to him and to show me my dependence upon him for everything, including my obedience, which is ultimately a gift from him, right? Or for those of us who, if you have a spouse with an addiction, right? Or if you have a marriage and you're having problems in your marriage, any sort of relational problem where you perceive that the issue is on the other side of the fence, the other person's responsibility, and you're saying, God, if you're good, why would you allow my marriage to be failing? Why would you allow me to be working at a job where my boss seems to totally have it out for me? Why? That doesn't seem loving to me. I don't feel happy. It doesn't feel like you're doing that out of kindness. It feels like you're doing it out of malevolence, right? But who are we to say that God's not using that in order to work loving kindness and change in us, or maybe in that other person, right? We have no way to conceive what God is doing behind the scenes and in other people's lives. So whenever we think about pain and about suffering and about how can God be good when there is so much pain and suffering, right? Well, what do we mean by good? Do we mean kind? Do we mean doing things that make people happy, right? Well, of course, allowing a lot of those things don't make people happy, but that doesn't mean that they're not good and loving because they produce other things that are worked out through love, right? Does that make sense? Are y'all kind of tracking what I'm saying? So anyways, this is a super great book, and I very well may do some more Chaotic Serenity segments about passages from this book. So if you have not checked it out, check it out. The Problem of Pain. Great book. So hey, until we meet again, thanks for being here. Appreciate y'all's time, and deuces.